It's 11 p.m. and you're working on a piece of client work that someone on your team told you was done 6 hours ago. It's not wrong exactly, but it's also not right. Not the way you would have done it, and definitely not the way that the client expects to receive it from you. So you have to fix it yourself again, and you tell yourself the same thing you told yourself last time. I just have to review everything until I find someone better who can do this for me. Except you've said that about the last 4 hires too. Hi, I'm Sarah Paikai, and I have run thousands of teams in companies over the past 15 years. And this is an age old story that I've heard time and time again. Today, I'm going to show you the system that we start to implement when you want your team to have better quality work so that you're not the bottleneck being stuck, making sure that everything gets done. I'm going to warn you, just as a person who has been the second in command, the consultant, the integrator, what have you, in many, 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 many different scenarios. There are two pieces of this. The first is the biggest one, which is that you have to make peace with something that I call good enough. Okay. There is a lot, especially when it is your company name, maybe it's your actual name on the company, and you want everything to be done the way that you would do it, especially if when you started this business, you were the person doing all the things. If you are at that stage now where you are still the person doing all the things and you're thinking about hiring, there is an immense fear of what's going to happen if the quality starts to go down. How would this still keep running? And how could anybody who is not me really get it done in the way that I would do it? The short answer is they won't. I wish that you could clone yourself and your brain, but no matter how many ads that you see out there, or how many consultants or how many companies promise you that they can clone you and they can do an exact replica of what you do, and that with just this one strategy or this system or this process or this operations or all of these things or this book, you too can get the exact carbon copy of what you're looking for. That's not how that works, unfortunately. I really wish. And as a reminder, I have worked with many different businesses in many different industries, ranging in many different incomes. Okay, so people who are making annually 5 figures, 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures, even 9 figures. And I have worked and I've heard all of their complaints about their team and or quality of work and or anybody that they brought on. I use team loosely. It could be a one-time contractor that you hired to do something for you. It could be somebody that you've had with you for decades. It could be somebody that is overseas. It could be somebody that is in your town that comes and works with you in person. But the number one thing that I do hear pretty consistently is this issue of the founder or the CEO feeling like whenever they're going to replace it, sometimes even just the operator themselves, when that it's time for them to replace themselves or to hire somebody else, nobody can quite get it right. And so they're stuck trying to redo the work time and time again. Okay, so I'm going to show you on my screen in just a little bit here. So if you've seen any of my videos in the past, this is not an unfamiliar sight for you. This is what I call the Bottleneck Elimination System roadmap. And today we're going to dial all the way down in on the outcome that is the quality control system. Surprise, surprise. The quality control system exists so that tasks that can be delegated out to the team in a way, this is really key now, okay? Tasks are delegated out to the team in a way, in a very specific way that I'm about to show you in this video, that allows the team to autonomously both do the work and then do a quality control check before returning the work to you. Now, even with all the best fail safes in hand and all the things, if you executed perfectly on everything that I'm about to show you in this video, even if you had all of that going for you, the work return, you need to couch your expectations. You need to understand not just what excellent is or how you would do it or what is actually needed or what is strategic or whatever the lens is that you have that makes you so amazingly brilliant and talented at what you do. Okay, you really have to think about what is a threshold, what is a practical threshold of what is good enough to be returned by somebody that is not you to you. And this has to happen for every single type of asset or service that you delegate out. You've got to be able to make peace and to find good enough. Okay. And that is the very first thing in this system that is not listed on this chart that is really important. If you're like, Sarah, that's not for me, I just can't do that. And I'm not saying good enough has to be bad, just to be clear. I'm saying that you have to be clear of what good enough looks like that you want back from the team. And you have to be able to verbalize and look at that and name that out loud. Okay, that's the way that this system is able to work. The way that I personally chart good enough that I'm measuring for myself is a team doing it with 75% or more of accuracy consistently. Okay, that's my personal, if you want to borrow my standard, that's great. If you want to set your own standard, have at it. So the quality control system is super fascinating to me of something that is such a big puzzle to many, but is actually quite simple. And the reason why it's quite simple is every single business model, industry, CEO's IP, team management, leadership skills, very, 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 very different. It varies greatly. There is no one right way to pinpoint how all this would work. There's no one size fits all at all. So the structure of this will feel very simple, and that's okay. Take this as an example of a workflow. Think about this more as a philosophy of how it should feel like, more than literally what the steps are on the screen. Okay. So this is how the workflow should feel like if you have a proper quality control system in place. Once somebody purchases and they make a payment, which is in the very first video in this series, and we talk through the marketing and sales department, there should be a scope of work that's generated of what has to happen. Okay, so if you're in a services-based business, this could be a proposal, it could be a layout of assets or deliverables that you're going to give to a client. If you are in e-commerce or an actual physical brick and mortar store, this can look like inventory, and the inventory that is going to be shipped to any particular person after purchase. Could be that simple, all right? But a scope of work or something of the equivalent is generated. Basically, it's a documentation saying, based off of what I sold to them in the ready to launch system and that they paid for, and that they're being onboarded into in the timeline, scope, and budget management system. This is a summary of the itemization of what we're going to do for them, give to them, have calls with them, meet with them around, so on and so forth. Okay, so this scope. This scope gets put into your project management system as individual pieces and tasks. So if there are 19 items in the scope, there are 19 tasks inside of your project management system. Now, attached to every single task should be a how-to checklist and a good enough checklist. So I'm going to start with these two pairs right here. At some point, I'll probably do two separate videos around what these individually are and take a very specific walk through each one. But the pair of a how-to checklist and a good enough checklist, as I like to call them. A how-to checklist is, people know what this is. It's a process. It's a checklist, I don't know, task list, a template task list that happens. It doesn't really matter. An SOP, but it is basically a checklist that tells somebody how to do this thing that's been assigned to them. And again, how do they get assigned? It's from the scope of work and from the milestones that are assigned. Okay. Again, go back to the timeline, scope, and budget system if you want to talk about this project timeline calculator. But either a milestone or a specific task, everyone should have a how-to checklist attached to it. And also at the end of the how-to checklist, or even separate, should be a good enough checklist. A good enough checklist is anywhere from 3 to 8 bullet points long that tells you specifically for this task of what you've been instructed to do, how to know whether these 3 to 8 points should be passed, like it's ready to go on and is ready to be submitted for approval, or it should be revised. Okay, so let's pretend that scope of work says there are 12 different things that we're going to do for a client, and we're going to create their sales funnel to disqualify them, disqualify bad leads for them, and we're also going to create social media content for them. Okay, so into the project management from the scope goes never have a tire kicker. So the disqualification funnel, we're going to build the funnel. There are like 19 things within that funnel that we're going to build. And then we're going to install the content flywheel. And there are 2 or 3 things that specifically for this particular client, they want their content flywheel to look like. Okay, so there are now 19 things in the scope of work, 19 to 23 things in the project management system. For each one of those 23 things, there is a how-to checklist attached to it. So if it says set up the content flywheel for the client, there is a how-to checklist attached that says, here's all the steps of how you install a content flywheel. In addition to that, there is a good enough checklist that has 3 to 8 points that once the content flywheel is installed, these are the most common areas where the team potentially could get it wrong and or are unique to the founder, where they specifically want their IP to do there. So these are 3 to 8 points that they're going to specifically check. And then there is, as they're checking it, there are 2 metrics. Either it passed because it hit this metric, or it looks like this, the most common issue that they have, and it needs to be revised. In the last video before this, I talked about the risk register. I talked about the out of scope document, and that's in the communications and meeting stack video. I talked about those 2 things because those are important to know how to inform some of what happens in your good enough checklist. It's a system. They all work together. Okay, so you're getting data from one part to feed into the next, and so on and so forth. But a good enough checklist is really, 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 really helpful, because what it does is it finds the most common mistakes, the 3 to 8 common mistakes, and or like these parts have to really, it's so important for the strategy or for client expectations or for the founder's IP. These 3 to 8 pieces really have to matter in this particular, whatever you're checking against, okay, whatever the checklist is for. And here's a specific thing that sometimes people think that they do, and it's a fail. It has to be revised. Or this is what good enough means to me, and it can pass. So if I'm looking at, say, let's use a content flywheel setup. Okay, so some of the things that I might do is like, did the client fill out the intake form, and is every piece of information in there? Do all the folders work properly? Is share access updated properly to make sure the client has access to it? Did the first video run through the content flywheel at the time we thought it would and create the folder? Did that get communicated to the project manager so that they can stop tracking this? Did we run into any issues on the back end with the technology that needs to go to the tech person? So these are all points that might be in my good enough checklist for the task of set up the content flywheel, where I've already gone through the process of the how-to checklist of how to set up the content flywheel. And for each of those 6 things that I mentioned in my good enough checklist, I will have a metric that shows this passes, it's good to move on to approval, or if you're running into this particular issue, it needs to be revised. So for example, when it says check all of the links and make sure that the client has access. For pass, I'll say specifically the client should only have access to the folder A, B, or C. For revise, if it has not been automatically shared, or you have not confirmed with the client that they use the right email for share access when they did their intake form, like make sure that the client can actually access it, because if not, we have to redo some of the process and the intake on there, or how it's set up for file access. It's a very bad example, probably not accurate. Don't tell my tech guy that this is what I said it was, because he's going to be like, nah, Sarah. But you see, that's an example of, that's why it's really important. The person who has that knowledge, the canon knowledge of like how it should exist and how we want it to take effect and what is good enough or not, should be the person creating this checklist. Imagine I asked my copywriter to make this checklist, or me, like how I just did. I probably got it close. If I was grading my good enough checklist, it was probably good enough. But it would be a whole different thing if I asked the actual technician, who was the first person who developed our content flywheel app for us and who knows how the backend works, and who invented all of the things and knows what, he would have a very different, maybe not too different, but the pass and fail specifically, his metrics would be a lot more accurate of what we would want everybody else to measure by, because this is a dude who has the IP of how it originated and what happened. Okay, so you see in this very specific example how helpful that can be. And so my encouragement is always, if you have a scope of work, the question first to answer is, how does your team actually know what to do? Well, how do they know that they're supposed to do it? That should be answered in the project management system. Once they know they're supposed to do it, how do they know how they're supposed to do it? And once they've done it, how do they know how to check their own work to see if it's good enough before they pass it on to you? Now, this can happen in a couple of different ways. This can be for internal types of projects. So specifically for marketing, it could be marketing content that they're creating for you, or different assets that they need to do for launches in the ready to launch system. It could be those type of things, or it could be items that you're giving to a client to review the work to be done. Or if it passes through a manager first before it goes to client sign off. There's a lot of different ways that this can happen, but the most important thing is whoever did the work, can they check it first against the intellectual property of what is good enough, what is considered good enough in this company for any given internal or external deliverable that they're required to produce and to make. Okay, that's a whole mouthful, but this is why it's super simple, because again, nuance. It depends on the type of company you have. I have some companies where they're doing this by department and sub-department. Like it's not even full company wide. Sometimes I have other clients where it's just for a particular project. They really want to make sure the project goes well. And so they might not have space or budget to revitalize their entire workings, but they're looking at a very specific initiative, and we're running them through eliminating the bottlenecks that might happen in that particular initiative. So there's a lot of varieties of ways, again, like I keep saying every time with this roadmap, that we scale it up or down. But I have tested it across thousands of companies, many more than that scenarios, to just really think about, okay, like how do we boil it down to something that makes sense, that can be scaled up or down. So this is a flexible structure. And then finally, if it is going to somebody for sign off, whether it's the marketing department or whether it's the client itself, there you would want to have a dashboard for where all assets go to be submitted for an approval. If you don't have a dashboard, some sort of process that exists that's unique to your company of how approvals get signed off on. Then of course there's the final draft where edits happen post having been in the approval dashboard and having notes left. And yeah, so that kind of completes this particular chain. Again, the chain can look different. The organizing of the workflow and where the boxes are, what these boxes are named specifically, will vary. But the general flow is scope into tasks, every task attached some kind of process that includes a good enough checklist that then moves into some form of approvals dashboard. I recommend splitting out internal assets versus client deliverables. And if there's a first pass of review of the client deliverables before it goes external for the client to review. Sorry, this is name wrong. It should say just client approval dashboard for the client themselves to review, and then a process to get the final drafts all tied out to ensure final nomenclature of all the files is named properly and is set up before it's saved. All right. So somebody once asked me, that's cool, does every single task that every single person does always have to have a checklist? No, not always. If it's in a scope of work that you're doing for a particular client, or it's about delivering, say like you are a brick and mortar or your e-commerce, if it's something that has to do with the client is going to get it, then absolutely yes. And if you have an internal team doing your marketing and it's a task that they have to do for marketing to present creative or assets, yes, those absolutely need to follow this if you want to have some sort of handle on your quality control. There's something else that I like to call the team task stack. These are repeating tasks that happen day in and day out that just have to do with the role and the position. Sometimes it's just maintenance, sometimes it's just basic communications, but that exists there. And that could be, I like to break it out. It's like at the start of every day, throughout the middle of the day, at the end of the day, and then once a week, once a month, once a quarter. And these are recurring tasks that should exist in your project management system. And if you have the right automation set up like we do, they auto spawn, they auto repeat so that you can see very quickly when somebody hasn't done the basics that they're supposed to do. So what that could look like is maybe as the customer service representative of Powered by Aloha, my job is to, it's not my job, but let's pretend, okay? Let's pretend my job was a CSR at Powered by Aloha, and my job is to set up somebody in the content flywheel. That might not be my full job. There could be a team task stack that's like, every morning I check Slack, I check the email inbox to see if there are any service requests. I move any service requests from the inbox over to the tech department. I check on open tech tickets. Then once a week, I might prepare a report of all the tech tickets and take it to the meeting that I have with my department. I might answer phone calls or check the I don't know, the chat bot that's on the website. If people are reaching out, I might go and pull data from the existing posts and how they're doing for engagement and so on and so forth. There's a lot of other things that I could be doing. Now, in an ideal world, all of those have a how-to checklist, right? That'd be really good. But sometimes it's just not, the founder or whoever the expert is just doesn't have time to write all of those things. Now, setting up the content flywheel for a brand new client who's being onboarded, very high in priority, very important. So we're definitely absolutely must have. But there are some rote tasks like, you know, reply back to emails in the inbox. Like there is not a one good how-to checklist. And open Gmail and sign into our company email address and look in the inbox is not a how-to check. It should, it's right. It's just a typical recurring task that happens. And so we call that the team task stack because it's just assigned. Every single person on our team has one of rote tasks that they're just assigned to do that may not, that will not differ no matter what's happening with the quantity of scopes of work coming in and out. It's just regular business as usual types of tasks that exist. So that's a bucket for that. And then finally, inside this quality control system, at the end, once the final draft is delivered, at that time is a time to have a process for how so you finish the work, you finish the scope of work with the client, and then you must also have a process for how you upsell them, the client, how you downsell the client, or if they're not a good fit for the upsell or downsell, or they don't want the upsell or downsell, how you offboard them. Now, the person who does all of the work and gets approval, or they're not the person who has to do this, but it's important to understand where in the sequence of the workflow this kicks in. You can get recurring revenue and increase the lifetime value of a client after you have turned in good work. It makes it so much easier for whoever that person, it makes it a no-brainer for both the client and for your salesperson, unless that person is not, that client is not a good fit, right? Or your person is not that great at sales. We have other processes for that too, but that's not this video. Okay. But the reason why it's here and not somewhere in the marketing system is because it's really important. It matters. These things of like, well, why, Sarah? Why do we have to have good enough checklists? And they should just know, and we're hiring them for their skill. Sure. But what you don't want to gamble with is the leverage that you have at the end of a scope of work to be able to sell them something else if it makes a good fit, to invite them into that, and or to offboard them properly and smoothly. And part of that, whether you upsell them, downsell them, or you just offboard them, you also want to be able to collect a testimonial. And we have a whole automation system that Powered by Aloha uses to collect this, to make it super easy and not weird, especially if they're a recurring client and or a recurring customer, if you have a brick and mortar business or, you know, that kind of stuff. So anyway, lots of nuance. I'm not going to get into that because that's not the purpose of this video. But really just thinking through the way that you increase the lifetime value and the overall value of the company and your revenue bottom line, honestly, is through doing really good work and making sure that the team knows what it is that was promised to the client, what particularly they've been assigned to do, how to do the tasks that they've been assigned to do, how to know what is good enough before they pass it on, where to pass it on through the approvals dashboard for whether it's internal review or external review, what the process is for the final draft, and then also what the process is for upselling, diagnosing how to upsell, downsell, offboard, and then to collect a testimonial. And that is how you really feed the ecosystem of the quality control system. This testimonial piece too will tell you a lot, and the offboarding process will tell you a lot. It will tell you also how to improve things that they didn't understand, which then feeds this one here, the previous video, the company meeting and communication stack, right? It'll help you know how to, it feeds the project management system, which is up here, because you'll know how to better explain what to do in the onboarding call or the onboarding process and all of those things, which is why is one big system, one big ecosystem that feeds itself. But yes, the main part of this that is the most important that most people do not use is this good enough checklist. So my hope is that this was helpful and it gets your mind really thinking about, instead of spending all that extra energy, your weekends, your nights, your vacations, and all that mental stress, just fixing everybody's stuff and hiring someone new again, really think about how do you get comfortable with good enough and defining and naming what good enough looks like in your particular scenario.